Now we will start with part 2 of the lecture, that is about firewall locations and topologies, which will be followed by intrusion prevention systems. A firewall is positioned to provide a protective barrier between an external, potentially untrusted source of traffic and an internal network. With that general principle in mind, a security administrator must decide on the location and on the number of firewalls needed. We will look at some common options. In this figure shown on this slide, it suggests the most common distinction that between an internal and an external firewall. An external firewall is placed at the edge of the local or enterprise network. One or more internal firewalls protect the bulk of enterprise network. Between these two types of firewalls are one or more network devices in a region referred to as DMZ, that is Demilitarized Zone Network. Systems that are externally accessible but need some protections are usually located on DMZ networks. The external firewall provides a layer of access control and protection for the DMZ systems consistent with their need for external connectivity. The external firewall also provides a basic level of protection for the remainder of the enterprise network. In this type of configuration, internal firewalls serve three purposes. Number one, it adds more stringent filtering capability compared to the external firewall in order to protect enterprise servers and workstations from external attack. Number two, it provides two-way protection with respect to the DMZ, protecting the remainder of the network from attacks launched from DMZ and protecting DMZ systems from attack from the internal protected network. Number three, multiple internal firewalls can be used to protect portions of the internal network for each other. Now we will be discussing the virtual private networks. In today's distributed computing environment, the virtual private networks offers an attractive solution to network managers. In essence, a VPN consists of a set of computers that interconnect by means of relatively unsecure network. Use of a public network exposes corporate traffic to eavesdropping and provides an entry point for unauthorized users. To counter this problem, a VPN is needed. In essence, a VPN uses encryption and authentication in the load protocol layers to provide a secure connection through an otherwise insecure network, typically the internet. VPNs are generally cheaper than real private networks using private lines, but rely on having the same encryption and authentication system at both ends. The encryption may be performed by firewall software or possibly by routers. The most common protocol mechanism used for this purpose is at the IP level and is known as IPsec. Figure in this slide shows a typical scenario of IPsec usage. An organization maintains LANs at dispersed locations. Non-secure IP traffic is conducted on each LAN. For traffic outside through some sort of private or public WAN, IPsec protocols are used to encrypt and compress all traffic going into the WAN and decrypt and decompress traffic coming from the WAN. Authentication may also be provided. These operations are transparent to workstations and servers on the LAN, a logical means of implementing an IPsec is in a firewall, as shown in this figure. If IPsec is implemented in a separate box behind internal to the firewall, then VPN traffic passing through the firewall in both directions is encrypted. In this case, the firewall is unable to perform its filtering function or other security. IPsec could be implemented in the boundary router outside the firewall. However, this device is likely to be less secure than the firewall and thus less desirable as an IPsec platform. A distributed firewall configuration involves standalone firewall devices plus host-based firewalls working together under a central administrative control. In this figure, it suggests a distributed firewall configuration. Administrators can configure host resident firewalls on hundreds of servers and workstations, as well as configuring personal firewalls on local and remote user systems. Tools let the network administrator set policies and monitor security across the entire network. These firewalls protect against internal attacks and provide protection tailored to specific machines and applications. Standalone firewalls provide global protection, including internal firewalls and an external firewall as discussed previously. With distributed firewalls, it may make sense to establish both an internal and an internal DMZ. Web servers that need less protection because they have less critical information on them could be placed in an external DMZ outside the external firewall. What protection is needed is provided by host-based firewalls on these servers. An important aspect of a distributed firewall configuration is security monitoring. Such monitoring typically includes log aggregation and analysis, firewall statistics, and fine-grained remote monitoring of individual hosts if needed. We can now summarize the discussion from our previous slides to define a spectrum of firewall locations and topologies. The alternatives as flashed on this slide can be identified as host resident firewall, screening router, single bastion inline, single bastion T, double bastion inline, double bastion T, and distributed firewall configuration. Host resident firewall, this category includes personal firewall software and firewall software on servers used alone or as part of all in-depth firewall deployment. Screening router is a single router between internal and external networks with stateless or full packet filtering, typical for small office, home office, SOHO applications. Single Bastion inline single firewall device between an internal and external router as shown on the upper figure. The firewall may implement stateful filters and application proxies. This is the typical firewall appliance configuration for small to medium-sized organizations. Single Bastion T is similar to single Bastion inline but has a third network interface on Bastion to a DMZ where externally visible servers are placed. Again, this is a common appliance configuration for medium to large organizations. Double Bastion inline. The lower figure illustrates this configuration where the DMZ is sandwiched between Bastion firewalls. This configuration is common for large businesses and government organizations. Double Bastion T figure on the left side of this slide illustrates this configuration. The DMZ is on a separate network interfaced on the Bastion firewall. This configuration is also common for large business and government organizations and may be legally required in some cases. Distributed firewall configuration is as illustrated in right side figure. This configuration is used by some large businesses and government organizations. Now coming on to intrusion prevention systems. A relatively recent addition to the terminology of security products is the intrusion prevention system or IPS. There are two complementary ways of looking at an IPS. An IPS is an inline network-based IDS, abbreviated as NIDS, that has the capability to block traffic by discarding packets as well as simply detect suspicious traffic. For host-based systems, an IPS is a host-based IDS that can discard incoming traffic. An IPS is a functional addition to firewall that adds IDS types of algorithms to the repertoire of the firewall. Thus, an IPS blocks traffic as a firewall does, but makes use of the types of algorithms developed for IDSs. It is a matter of terminology whether an IPS is considered a separate, new type of product or simply another form of firewall. As with an IDS, an IPS can be either host-based or network-based. A host-based IPS, abbreviated as HIPS, makes use of both signature and anomaly detection techniques to identify attacks. In the former case, the focus is on the specific content of application, payloads in packets, looking for patterns that have been identified as malicious. In the case of anomaly detection, the IPS is looking for behavior patterns that indicate malware. Examples of the types of malicious behavior addressed by HIPS include modification of system resources, privilege escalation exploits, buffer overflow exploits, access to email contact lists, directory transversal. Attacks such as these result in behaviors that can be analyzed by a HIPS. The HIPS capability can be tailored to the specific platform. A set of general purpose tools may be used for desktop or server system. Some HIPS packages are designed to protect specific types of servers, such as web servers and database servers. In this case, the HIPS looks for particular application attacks. In addition to signature and anomaly detection techniques, a HIPS can use a sandbox approach. Sandboxes are especially suited to mobile code such as Java applets and scripting languages. The HIPS quarantines such code in an isolated system area, then runs the code and monitors its behavior. If the code violates predefined policies or matches predefined behavior signatures, it is halted and prevented from executing in the normal system environment. HIPS typically offers desktop protection for system calls, file system access, system registry, and host input-output. Now coming on to network-based IPS. A network-based IPS or NIPS is in essence an inline NIDS with the authority to discard packets and tear down TCP connections. As with the NIDS, a NIPS makes use of techniques such as signature detection and anomaly detection. Among the techniques used in an NIPS but not commonly found in a firewall is a flow data protection. This requires that the application payload in a sequence of packets be reassembled. The IPS device applies filters to the full content of the flow every time a new packet for the flow arrives. When a flow is determined to be malicious, the latest and all subsequent packets belonging to the suspect flow are dropped. The general methods used by a NIPS device to identify malicious packets are pattern matching, stateful matching, protocol anomaly, traffic anomaly, and statistical anomaly. We have already discussed SNOT in our last lecture. A modified version of SNOT inline gives SNOT an intrusion prevention capability. SNOT inline includes a replace option which allows SNOT user modify packets rather than drop them. This feature is useful in a honeypot implementation. One approach to reducing the administrative and performance burden is to replace an inline network products, that is firewall, IPS, IDS, VPN, anti-spam, anti-spyware, and so on, with a single device, a unified threat management or UTM system that integrates a variety of approaches to dealing with network-based attacks. A significant issue with a UTM device is performance, both throughput and latency. For example, typical throughput losses for current commercial devices is 50%. The figure on this slide shows a typical UTM appliance architecture. The inbound traffic is decrypted if necessary before its initial inspection. If the device functions as a VPN boundary node, then IPsec decryption would take place here. An initial firewall module filters traffic, discarding packets that violates rules and passing packets that conform to rule sets in the firewall policy. Then a number of modules analyze individual packets and flow of packets at various protocols levels. A data analysis engine is responsible for keeping track of packet flows and coordinating the work of antivirus, IDS, and IPS engines. The data analysis engine also reassembles multi-packet payloads for content analysis by the antivirus engine and the web filtering and anti-spam modules. Some incoming traffic may need to be re-encrypted to maintain internal security. All detected threats are reported to the logging and reporting module, which is used to issue alerts for specified conditions and for forensic analysis. The bandwidth shaping module can use various priority and quality of service algorithms to optimize performance. Now coming on to the summary, we have introduced need for and purpose of firewalls. We have also discussed types of firewalls and firewall hosting, location and topologies, and finally we discussed intrusion prevention systems. Few open source firewall and intrusion prevention tools are as flashed on this slide. Please go through these tools in your own time, one by one, and prepare for a project case study after 2 weeks. A review on the progress will be conducted in the next class as well. Assignments, please go through review questions 9.1 to 9.16. Submit your answer sheets during next class. Also go through practical firewall rules and present in the next class. Choose different firewalls by each student. Then we are already working on the research project. Please complete this task on time and get ready for the group presentation and demo at some suitable time. We will have a webinar on 1 of 2020 on 4th June. The details are as per this slide. Then we will have another webinar on 25 June. The details are as per this slide. Please prepare accordingly. Then there is a third webinar on 9th July and get ready for this as well. Thank you. This comes to the end of this lecture, and if you have any questions, you can shoot now. You can send your assignments or any queries on the contact information provided on this slide.